invent this. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about her, and I think it's not inappropriate to take a biblical sentence that all of you know. In my Father's house are many mansions. I have read Mrs. Noack's essays and have thought about her dichotomy of her life as a mother and an artist. And it seems to me that this is one of the things we could say, that our artist mother and speaker this evening has many homes. She was born in Frisco, Iowa, so she's a native Iowan, and she has a studio presently in Bayville, New York, right? And she had 4 years of undergraduate work up at Carleton College, which is one of our fine undergraduate schools in Minnesota. And then she came back to Iowa and studied for her MFA at the University at Iowa City. She worked in painting and printmaking. And she lived then also in another home for a time in Austria, studying with Oskar Kokoschka at Salzburg. I think her working and her spiritual home must be alive, because in it are both children and saints. She moves easily in her figurative works from objective reality to states of soul. Her own children, Richard, Tanya, and Jana, are at very energetic ages, and she shares her studio life with them, much as we know Picasso always made children welcome in his studio, often when he didn't welcome adults. And she divides this life between her studio with something which she has called in her writings the necessary. We all know what dailiness does to our living. She's also at home with books, and I feel that within them she has found many mansions of thought. But you shall hear all about this for yourselves from Karen Laub-Novak, whose topic tonight is the artist's way of life, and she has illustrative transparencies of her works.
That was a very beautiful introduction. Thank you very much. My voice is just about gone. We've been talking all day long. Just holler. There are microphones here, but if I start wandering down lower and lower, holler at me. Tell me to speak up. Christmas Humphreys, who is the head of the Zen Society for a long time, maybe he still is in England, has one of his books is called The Inner Way. And in the introduction of that, he says that the one thing that we have to share with each other is a record of our own experience. And that record should be read with the inner eye. I don't think you can talk about painting. I don't think you can talk about the mystical experience, what exactly that is, but you can talk about the experiences around it. You can, it isn't sort of totally ineffable. I think there are ways to talk about the stages that you're going through, the kind of perceptions you're trying to have. I tend to talk the way I paint, so bear with me. I'll a little something over there and a little something down here and something over there, and in the end you hope that it all sort of comes together and makes some sense. One of the biggest difficulties talking about art is that you're trying to do two things. You're trying to develop a skill, and to develop that skill you have to go through certain very conscious stages. The second side is you're trying to transcend that skill. What does it mean to come to that kind of intuitive stage where all of a sudden you've transcended a whole range of conscious decisions, conscious training? And I found myself the student stage, or the apprenticeship stage as I like to call it, a very difficult period, because you don't have a vision of what you're about. You sort of have a partial vision, and you sort of keep grasping for it, and every time you think you have it, it's eluded you again. I got interested in mysticism about 15 years ago through the Christian mystics, and especially St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila. And what struck me there, too, is there was an attempt to try to describe the same kind of journey, this inward journey and an outward journey at the same time, trying to be both Martha and Mary, if you use the biblical language of the contemplative and the person of practical wisdom, the action and the doing and the being. Peggy says at some point, he says that everything begins in mysticism, goes to politics, and returns again to mysticism. And I take that as being, and I want to keep coming back to this, is mysticism is not kind of a quietism. It's not kind of a passivity. It's not sort of a sitting there waiting for some kind of great intuitive moment to come to you. It's an incredibly active thing. But it's active in the sense that it is an interior journey. But the truth in the action, as St. Teresa of Avila says, the truth in this experience is in the action. So there's this constant call both toward the reflective and toward the active. It's not just a sort of passive inward journey. And a lot of people, they think of mysticism and they think of people levitating against the ceiling or having strange visions and this kind of thing. And that's what I found very interesting. I'm talking more about this than I meant to. I meant to do something else first, but anyway. St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross attracted me in the beginning because they really talked about warnings. They warned you about each stage that you think that in some way you've come to a grasp of what you're about, and you have a kind of good feeling about it, can also be a form of self-deception. And at each moment you're pushed to be something else again. St. Teresa says our soul has greater capacity than we realize. And at each point, you sort of think you're where you should be. There's a kind of consolation in it, is the word she uses. But there's something else still, and you're always pushing forward, each step, and it's still beyond your grasp. A warning against visions and imaginations and locutions and all this kind of thing. And that is only stages that you go through because of the deepening sense of awareness and perception. We are all something else that we aren't. And I'm a frustrated writer at heart. And there was an article I did a couple years ago on art and mysticism, so I'm going to read to you every now and then some of my golden words of wisdom. One thing about writing, there's the activity of painting and talking and writing are three such different things that you find yourself shifting. Painting, you're sort of trying to separate thinking about things, and I play very loud music. It drives Michael wild, and we had to go to the great extravagance of having 2 radios because he likes to have nice, quiet music to write to. It releases the rational part of his mind, and I'm in there with this stuff going thump, 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 and these little voice comes down from upstairs saying, stop that, it's too loud. And it's almost as if that loud music creates a kind of silence or separates the thinking part. In the writing, it's as if you have a chance there to say something, to write it down, and to fiddle with it and say, that word wasn't the right word, and go back and change it. When you talk, you've said it. I go back later and say, oh, why did I use that word? It's gone. I don't have the chance to retrieve it. Anyway, art and mysticism are a journey. Both draw out the imagination, our sense of community with others. Both are attempts to live out of more than our heads alone. Both are attempts to better understand our instincts. You know what? I'm not using the microphone. My microphone's back there, isn't it?
That one's on right there.
Hello? Okay. All right. You can hear me? Go back to these words of wisdom. Both are attempts to better understand our instincts, emotions, senses, to live our lives with greater insight, to interpret our experiences, and to act, rather than to be held captive by indecision, passivity, fears, inhibitions, to develop an expanded and awakened consciousness. Art and mysticism involve awakening, as Zen mysticism says, to the self before we were born. Both begin with experience, not with concepts, and both lead us through deepening stages of awakening, reflection, practice, discipline, through darkness and union. Their aim, acting, responding, being vulnerable, a losing of the self and the true self, a journey into the self and outside the self, a journey to the center of the soul, and at that moment, a joining of the outer and the inner life. I'm also very interested in religion. The point of religion and creativity is coming from the same center. Religion and creativity are stages of experience. I can't talk about the meaning of my work, but I like to talk about the experiences surrounding it, slides of the work in process, ideas cherished, books read, floating on the edges of experience, the problems of practical life, children, women's liberation, cups of coffee, the clutter that comes from a house full of children. Inspiration is fragmentary. And I'm going to come back to that image, fragmentary. One other thing I want to remember to mention before I get into the slides. The K period, Laub Novak, and I lost my hyphen on my brochure this year, which is most distressing. Now, I got married about 12 years ago now, I guess. It's been so long, I've forgotten how many years. But anyway, at that point, it was before women's liberation, but I had this state of anxiety of, my goodness, I didn't want to be Karen Novak, right? You know, I'm going to lose my identity doing this thing. I didn't want to be Karen Laub because I didn't figure I was a suffragette from the 30s. And my solution was that my family, part of my relatives are in Luxembourg, and there they hyphenate the name, but it would go the other way around. It would be Novak Laub. And I decided for those who are really fussy about this, Laub Novak sounds better, and I can still be Karen Novak, you know, if there's too much concern. I'll have to tell you about my Gleam toothpaste boxes too, because this will explain my sense of disorganization. And I end up talking a great deal about discipline because I'm very disorganized. Gleam toothpaste came out with a special about 2 years ago where they gave away wastepaper baskets, and they came in assorted colors. And I went out and I bought 15 tubes of Gleam toothpaste, and I got wastepaper baskets in bright pink and in green and in yellow. And I put all my important things that should be done right away in pink boxes, and I put the things that could wait a long time in the green box, and the things that were sort of in between that were half important and half could wait were in the yellow boxes. Last year, 2 years later, I discovered in my hot pink box a letter from the American Academy of Religion. I'd given a talk down there, and they'd sent a letter back saying, you know, if you would like to publish your lecture in the American Academy of Religion journal, you know, please send it to us by such and such a date. And I thought, damn it, you know, that's a professionally important thing to do. This letter has been sitting in my hot pink box for 2 years. All right, now, this is only to describe now what happened next. All right, now we got the K period Laub Novak, right? I sent out some letters. This was 10 years ago when I was first started exhibiting. And I sent out a bunch of letters, and I signed them Karen Laub Novak. And I got back these nice little, this is for the women in the audience, right? I got back these nice little mimeograph letters, you know, where they say, they type in, Dear Miss Laub Novak, and then the mimeograph thing says, thank you for your letter of inquiry. We have all the artists that we need at this point, but we will keep your letter on file. And the wastepaper basket, obviously. And then the stamped signature on the bottom. Well, I sent out another batch of letters. Some of the second batch went to the same place the first batch did because I'm very disorganized. Now, on the second batch of letters, I signed K period Laub Novak. And something very interesting happened. Even if they said no, I got a personal letter back to Dear Mr. Laub Novak. And I thought, suddenly I had visions of Kurt Laub Novak with his beard is writing in, and they would say, Dear Mr. Laub Novak, we are most interested in your resume. You know, please send us slides of your pictures or your slides, whatever. And we got to the next stage, and we got the slides back in, and we got another. You don't really lie, right? You just continue to sign K period Laub Novak. So the next letter, you know, when the slides come back, and they say, yes, we would like to arrange something on this. And finally, I had a show in San Francisco, and they got all the paintings up, and they got the little sign saying K period Laub Novak. And the people started arriving, and the man that owned the gallery was a society man, and all these terrific people came. I mean, they really looked fantastic. Ladies in long, you know, beautiful Indian dresses. And you must remember, I'm from Iowa, right? And I always look like a refugee from the Cresco, Iowa PTA. There is some way that I never look right for the right occasion. Is absolutely no question. I was there in a knit suit, you know, neither fashionably long or fashionably short, at the knee. How could I have done this? My mind is boggled. There I'm standing in the corner, and people are saying things like, where's the artist? And the man pouring the champagne says, he isn't here yet. And then they're saying things like, these paintings are so masculine. They're so virile. I thought, gee, terrific, you know. That was a compliment at that time. I thought, masculine and virile. what I've always wanted to be, is masculine and virile. So there's my masculine virile paintings hanging there on the wall. And finally, the final blow was, I mean, I shouldn't get carried away with this, but the final blow was, the San Francisco Chronicle did a full page of pictures. And the paintings had their picture taken, and my husband, who was there with his beard and beads, had his picture taken. Of course, everybody thought he was the artist. The gallery director had his picture taken, and the long, lovely ladies had their picture taken, and I didn't have my picture taken. On top of it, when he took me around, the gallery man took me around to meet people, everybody would look at me and they'd say, oh, you know, you're the artist, which is very discouraging. Times have changed. Last year I came out, and I finally had a brochure that said Karen on it. It was a great moment. It took 15 phone calls to decide if we were really going to use Karen. I got sidetracked. I want to show my slides. I mean, that's what I'm here to do. And as I show the slides, what I really want to do is to talk about the mysticism, about the activity of painting and the experiences around it. We will get to all that if I have enough light to see my notes. I'm really organized tonight. I have all my notes. I want to do one. I want to start with this one. After I painted this, first let me explain how I paint, is that I didn't start out as a figurative painter in one sense. Is the way beginning, coming out of a small, I went to a parochial school. There weren't any art classes, and of course the thing that's encouraged is if you can draw photographically. And I was a great photographic drawer. I used to sit on curbstones and draw houses with every brick in the house and every leaf on the tree and every dewdrop on the grass and this kind of thing. I was a budding Andrew Wyeth. Then I went through a whole period of everything being incredibly abstract and nothing there at all. And then I sort of got interested in the figure and decided to keep doing the figure until I got tired of it, and I'm still there. But anyway, I start, though, without any sense of where it's going. And the figures, I mean, what always happens is that in the end, the figures are merged. It's like starting just with color and putting color on, and in the end, what comes out of it. And a lot of the paintings are painted upside down. But this one, after I finished it, I read a poem by Peggy where it talks about the restless sleep, and I thought, aha, you know, the restless sleep, anxiety, etc. And my father took one look at it, and he said it looked like a girl caught under a garage door. How do you like that? A good Iowa father for you. What I really need is a Jewish mother, but somebody who would say, terrific. My daughter, the painter, you know. I have a lot of friends who are Jewish, and they said, you know, it's really terrific because you get such encouragement. And I said, I've been looking for it. Anyway, he still can't figure out why I'm not a portrait painter. I want to say another word about fathers before I let this go. I have this theory about women who got interested, you know, ended up having careers. And one is that they were a daughter of a father without a son, right? And it meant that all your aspirations, and especially my father came out of the Depression, and a lot of the things that he wanted to do, he was never able to do. He thought of himself as the next follower of Frank Lloyd Wright, but they weren't building buildings in the Depression. So he finished architectural school, and he worked for $80 a month for 3 years. Then he did law, and he did law by correspondence and worked on it every day for 4 years. And there were a whole range of things that he really wanted to do that he just never had a chance. He calls his generation the lost generation. And I think a lot of vision, a lot of thing is put in then to what your children are going to do. The only side of it is, if it's a son, that's one thing, you know, you're just expected to do it. With the daughter, you get a double edge. And the one thing is like, go to college, but get an education. 99% of the girls go to college. This is what he tells me. 99% of the girls go to college to get a husband. I want you to be one of the 1% that goes to get an education. Well, I came out of college without a husband, and he started getting a little nervous. Then what do? You decide to go to graduate school. Well, if it's all right, if you're going to get a teacher's certificate, or if you're going to get a nursing degree, or if you're going to get some, he says, get a practical license, because if anything happens to your husband, then you can take care of yourself. And I said, well, I'm going to get an MFA. Well, any of you here with an MFA know, know what you can do with an MFA. It's not very easy to get a job or anything else with an MFA. He was really right. I mean, what I've come to decide is I wish I'd gotten a degree in something. I wish I'd gotten the license in something. These are paintings now in process, and starting, not every stage is represented. And the reason for taking the slides in the first place is that, especially as a student, I found I always over-rendered, over-painted, not knowing what to do. It would be either stopping too soon, because it's like this, you reach the end of your skill, but you didn't know what to do with it next, or keep overdoing it and overdoing it. And people would come around and say, you're over-rendering. And the only thing I could think of is that down the street from where we lived was an old factory called the Rendering Works, where they took horses and they ground them up for manure. And it was obviously right. You'll see at one point, a lot of my paintings began looking sort of like something that could fertilize the fields of Iowa. The thing too is that at each point you don't take a photograph. Is that when you're not sure what to do next, I would stop and take a photograph. But what I was hoping is that it would show me that say, look, you should have stopped 3 months before. To get a kind of objectivity to the thing. When you're in the middle of it, every little thing becomes precious. You get a purple down in the corner, and it's so fantastic that you just want to ignore the rest of the painting. And so I have in my father's basement, so to speak, he claims 100 unfinished Laub Novaks, which periodically he threatens to finish and sign himself. But it was just a case that, you got a happy accident, and you loved the happy accident so much that you didn't know what else to do with it. And you'd leave the happy accident as a great monument to indecision. Oh, this is my over-rendered stage. The only thing is I kind of like it now. But anyway, what happened there is it was just too much, I felt. And I was looking at the slides, and I liked the white. And I decided to bring the white back in. And this is the finished painting. It's 4 foot by 5 foot, and these are acrylics. And I tend to paint very flat in acrylics. And I got interested in the figure a few years ago, stripping the skin off, and just the form of the muscles. And that is a man and a woman. It is not 2 football players, which somebody asked me once. And my little son said, he says, are they fighting? And I said, well, he's 9 years old. And then these are details that go closer and closer into the painting. I think sometimes, even looking at a slide, a detail will send off a series of images for something else. I've sometimes looked at details and started other paintings just from a set of colors or from a shape. My red phase. I went through sort of phases. I discovered one thing interesting is that when we were living in Boston, and about 10 years ago, everything I painted was black. Black on black, and dark green on black, and dark blue on black, and really dark, dark, dark. And we moved to California, and everybody said, oh, you know, just being outside and all that fresh air is going to affect your color. And I sort of vehemently denied it. I said, no, I am a black painter, and I shall be a black painter. And I got out there, and all of a sudden the colors started getting brighter and brighter and brighter, and really intense oranges and yellows. And since we've moved back to New York, the colors are getting darker and darker and darker again. This is sort of the middle stage. Now this is an area of just a few inches, like 2 inches, 1 inch by 2 inch or whatever. My slides are to remind me to talk about things. And this is Iowa. There's something very different. I mean, I really feel very strongly about the way your perceptions and your imagination are formed are not only your immediate family, but the whole kind of environment you're brought up. Being brought up in a city and being brought up in country is very different. And of course, the other thing is the cemetery. My grandmother, I used to spend a great deal of time with my grandmother, who I consider early women's lib type, I guess. She went to college in the 1800s. She didn't get married till she was 30, and she had one child, and taught school for a long time. But she used to like to spend a lot of time in the cemetery, and we would go out and we'd dig up the ground and we'd plant flowers and we'd sit around. And I decided if I was going to take a picture to talk about roots, I would go back and take a picture of my Iowa cemetery. So here we are. I have a very strong feeling on the necessity of going back and understanding your roots as the source of liberation. And then when I went to Carleton College, it was almost the reverse happened. It was like, oh, terrific. We've got this girl. As far as I know, I was the first person from my high school to get a college degree that didn't become a nun or a priest. So here we've got this person in this really good school, the Harvard of the Middle West, as they say. Everything was an essay exam, and I didn't know how to write an essay. English in high school was working on the school newspaper, and I couldn't spell, and you have to be able to spell to look up the words in the dictionary. And also I was a Catholic on top of it, and there's this kind of thing about, terrific, you know, look at all this mess we've got to work with. Well, liberate her from all this. We're going to liberate her from this kind of naive, obedient, undoubting thing, and we're going to liberate her from this and liberate her from that. And terrific, and all it did is make an absolute, you know, send you into an absolute state of chaos. I don't think that's quite the way to go about liberation. And I thought, well, I mean, there's a lot of things you don't like in your background. A lot of bad things will happen. But maybe the strength of what you do comes out of the bad instead of out of the good. And the strength of, say, Flannery O'Connor's writing and Faulkner, especially in the South, there's a greater sense of going back to your roots and using those things, those images, as a kind of source and vitality of your painting. My little girl has a terrific thing that she calls herself Tanya Teresa Marie Sakmar Swenson Laub Novak. And when she's introduced, you know, she's asked who she is. That's what she comes up with. She gets all the grandparents in there and everything else. That's a sense of continuity with the past, you know. And the whole sense, the strength of mysticism is viewing life as sort of a whole rite of passage. How do I live my life out from birth to death? And another painting. I'd like to get in. I didn't get into the Christian mysticism until I got into graduate school. But I think the thing there was that Christian mysticism, I want to come back to this again, is that Christian mysticism described a journey into the self that was pre-Freudian. And in a sense has, I think, a lot more vitality and a lot more strength to it than contemporary psychology. I tried reading Freud and I tried reading Karen Hardy, and even Jung, who in a sense you would think I'd be very compatible with. But the strength of it is something else, and part of it is that sense of responsibility for the self, what the self does. This is one that took 4 years to finish. And I was at the point where, you know, you paint whether you want to paint. I'd made a great move forward. And I started this, and I went out in the fields, and this was in Boston, and started this landscape. And I got back into the studio, and I thought, why was I painting a landscape? And I turned it upside down. This is called indecision. We will now talk about indecision. So I turned it upside down, and the trees are now down in the lower left-hand corner. And I hired this model, and I came and brought her in, and I sat her down, and I started painting her. And it got darker and darker. And I thought, why am I painting this woman? This nice little plump Rubens woman is sitting here. And down at the end, this was a studio that somebody had tried to start a gallery in. It was in a garage section in Boston. And they had a terrific string of lights. And it was 100 feet long. And at the end of they couldn't make a go of it. I mean, it was such a bad section of Boston that nothing was going on. But anyway, they abandoned it, and I rented it as a studio. And you could play with these lights and turn things on and off. And this, at the end of the 100 feet, was sitting in the darkness, upside down. Okay, now think about that. Upside down, it looked like a suspended rib cage, and I thought, terrific. For some reason, I wanted a rib cage. So I turned my painting upside down again, which is really right side up. And the trees are now back in the right-hand corner, and the woman's head is that little lump down there on the bottom. And also, this is oil. It's not the acrylics. That other one before was acrylic, which makes I tend to paint with acrylics very flat. They're sort of the liquid consistency. With the oils, every color there is still there in a way from that first landscape. And that blue is a beautiful blue. I really liked it. It looks like just a big black mass there now. But it was a really beautiful blue. You know, you get something you really like. And it was a textbook case of good brushstroke, you know, like nice texture, things going in different directions. And I got really attracted to that blue. And I sort of knew it shouldn't be there. So I put this paper on the painting. And it sat there for a few more months that way. And then I turned it to the wall for a few more months. And I would get it out, and I would look at it upside down again for a while. And it was terrific, because with a room that size, you can have 30 paintings around and sort of go from painting to painting without getting sort of over-cluttered, you know. I mean, you can sort of separate yourself because you've got so much space. So things would sit there, and they would go back and forth, and people would say, you know, how can you have all these things going at one time? Doesn't it confuse you? And at that time, it didn't. Now I would, you know, now it makes me very nervous. You know, I get so really confused when I have so many. Anyway, sat for a few more months that way. And then I gradually started painting it out. And the thing is that with a writer, if you're writing something, you've always got an earlier draft. And you can be starting on a second, a third draft, and you can remember something from maybe the first draft, a really good phrase or a paragraph or a way of putting it. And you can go back and retrieve it and sort of clip things up and paste it back in. And with a painting, once you've painted something over, you can't retrieve it again. Well, this is my Neo-Michelangelo stage. Once this was done, this was finally finished in, what, 64, 68, 68. After 4 years of diligent work. It was really 5 years, but I don't want to admit it. And we tried once to even hang this on the ceiling someplace. But the figure, once the blue was out, the figure started floating. And then now these are details going closer and closer into the painting. But as you get closer into that face, the detail of the eye, for example, is very naturalistic, and the nose and the mouth. But it's a blind eye. And I hadn't noticed that. Somebody pointed that out to me one time, that there were all these paintings that had blind eyes without pupils. And it wasn't a deliberate thing. It's like I really like to draw eyes. I can really draw hands and feet, too. And I don't know if any of you remember The Horse's Mouth, that movie a long time ago. He was into a foot stage, you know. I was into my foot stage, you know. And I saw this movie, and I just went wild. I thought, fantastic. A whole wall full of feet. But when you start leaving things out and adding them in, there's another reason for it. I mean, why is the reason there isn't an eye? And I read a poem by Eliot after this, and it said something about the blind eye creating the images between the gates, and in the sense the people in the east staring at the sun until they went blind. But I think unconsciously a lot of things will start coming out at a certain point, that even though you can do something else, some of the texture of the canvas still comes through. Where was that? That's a very good question. Let me take a look at that. I don't know. I think I've got another thing at the end. I'll see if I can figure out where that is. It's a very small area. I mean, these are areas of just a few inches. And it's interesting because from a distance, you don't really realize sometimes that there's that many different colors. It may look sort of all white, but when you get close into it, it's like a whole series of... That's the de Kooning influence, right? Now, this one. This is the one I always try to avoid talking about. Oh, that other one, too. That other one. Let me go back 1 second. I'm sorry I don't have a... that sense of being able to change sort of midstream, I think is very important, to be kind of open and flexible. And to sort of, even though you're starting in one direction, being able to let other things sort of filter in and respond to it. And Mauriac said once, you know, we're all filled with a whole series of filters. And we can't really take away the filters, but at least if we can clean them once in a while, so we're able to see, let our vision move beyond and the periphery widen. Teresa of Avila, when she talks about entering into these stages of understanding, she said that what happens is that once the awakening occurs, you enter in by whatever door. You may all enter, you can enter in by different doors, but it's like entering in through a new sense of perception. But what happens, it suddenly doesn't become clear anymore. It's not like a linear progression where you come to some sort of understanding. It's that you're entering into a series of rooms that are on top of each other, to the side, underneath you. And that your range of I don't even know what the word I want now is, but that sense of being present to things becomes incredibly confusing. It's entering into a kind of chaos because everything takes on equal importance. You see too much. You know, you suddenly, your eyes are too clear, and you can't sort out. You can't see. You can't even make decisions at some point because everything seems to have equal weight. This painting is to remind me to talk about Arthur Koestler. And he has this image of the tightrope in his act of creation, where he talks, the artist is on a tightrope between what he calls the practical world and the world of imagination. And he feels that this creative tension that creates, I mean, he uses all these fancy words like bisociation. You know, all of a sudden, you're connecting things that aren't normally rationally connected. And at the moment you make those connections, it's that eureka thing. It's a sudden new creative understanding. And that scientists, artists, any creative act depends on this kind of creative tension. The other thing that attracts me more is the kind of language Mircea Eliade uses in his books on myth and reality. He has a whole series of really beautiful books describing primitive religions, but describing in a way that talks about modern culture. And he talks about modern culture almost as a rite of initiation at one point, where the modern world is like a person being swallowed by a monster. And I mean, all his imagery sort of moves on this line. But he says that this tightrope, this tension, this point of tension, is really between demons and ordered space. And his language to me is much more violent. It's not just the practical world and the world of imagination. It's much more violent than that. It's much more destructive than that. And I think that there's a kind of, because the destructive and the creative run so close together, that sometimes it gets to be confused. And it's almost implied that to be creative, you also have to be destructive. And, you know, it's like the reverse side of either thing. You can move either direction. And I've met people who say, you know, terrific, let's enter into chaos. Chaos is terrifying. Chaos is the Dite Nark that the mystics talk about. But that's not the point of creation. That's not where the vitality comes out of. The vitality comes at the point where the tension, when they speak of the void, being in nothingness, neither rising or falling, the point of tension is not the move into the chaos, but it's pain and tranquility at the same time, is the way Teresa of Avila describes it. I had if I can find it, if I can read it in the dark. Both mysticism and art draw out our sense of union with the universe. We feel an inner power, energy, and delight, and we feel anguish and human fears. We are possessed by angels and by demons, and we seek the center of the soul, that place of great despair at the center, that sense the mystics speak of as the dark night. We are captured by a brief insight, a feeling of totality. We achieve a sense of direction, and then enter a stage where all supports drop away and become meaningless, a sense of complete loss. Despair is part of that dark night, but the void and despair are different. In despair, we're still possessed, attacked by those continual burdens from the past, regrets, indecisions. How many sleepless nights remembering those times of poor decisions, doing and saying the wrong thing, the dark night that is full of our best and worst impulses. In isolation, the void peoples itself with false demons. It feeds upon the solitary ego. A sense of common suffering is lost, and we cannibalize ourselves. Panic makes it ugly and terrifying. St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila, the Zen mystics, each speak in a different way to the inner journey. We have a glimmer of understanding of the fruitfulness in the void, not of joy, not anguish, but a moment of understanding in the constant presence of both, a sense of reconciliation suspended over darkness, no longer falling into space, the continual nightmare, clutching for something to stop that sensation opening beneath us, but resting, suspended within it, neither rising or falling, quiet with great anguish and great joy, present to our inner strength and weakness, and welcoming our weakness, present to the strength and weakness in others, emancipated from duality. The journey that takes us into the self and out of the self, whoever loses his soul shall find it. Creativity springs from that center and at that moment, ever coming again and leaving us. We reach the center and we lose it again. To know that that is the way is enough.
Reach those points and finish the painting. Is that?
That's the point at the finish of the painting?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, when you have those experiences.
No, I think the experience is there all the time. That's a good question. Let me come back to it. I got to think about that one a little bit. I can't separate it out in some way from everything else. It's like it's a part of everything. But let me talk about this studio first. I'll think about that. That's a. Now, I've really been working up to this. I have a thing about discipline. I probably should find another word for it. But the trouble is that, I mean, there's all ways of looking at discipline, and I very much got a bad kind of discipline, I think. The Germanic discipline, you know, to be seen and not heard kind of thing. Series of ought-nots. I don't think that that's the kind of, there's all forms of discipline. There can be destructive discipline, and there can be discipline that can be viewed as a kind of guide. And if we view discipline the way the mystics do and the way the Zen mystics do, it becomes a different kind of thing. It becomes a development of habit, of schedule, of really learning your own limits. When I was in graduate school, there was two things. It was very hard to ever get down to working. And the big thing had been, you know, B.F. Skinner. My day and age, B.F. Skinner was really big. You know, and I figured that, you know, the inspiration, the moment of inspiration, there'd be some way to track that back, you know, and you positively reinforce it, and terrific, then you'd have another inspired moment. So if I had an inspired day or an inspired moment, I'd try to think, what did I do? Did I get up at 8 o'clock, walk around the room 15 times and have a cup of coffee? Aha, eureka, it will happen, you know. So I spent a great deal of time getting up at a certain hour, drinking cups of coffee, walking around the room, you know, going through this little ritual. It didn't work. Then the next thing I tried was, well, if you sit and be receptive to the muse will descend upon you, and you will be greatly inspired. And I spent a great deal of time sitting and waiting for the muse to descend, and the next thing I would do, I would sort of list to the side, and then I'd be asleep. And I really spent a lot of time sleeping. I slept during the day, and I slept at night, and I slept during classes, and it was really a disaster. So the next thing I took a job, and that's another great escape. And I was teaching at Carleton and teaching art, and I still wasn't getting any painting done. Finally, I decided you either have to do it. Well, the time when I had studied with the Kokoschka, I really learned something about working from all day long. It was just fantastic, you know. The day wasn't broken up. You didn't have to go to English at one time and math at another time. All day long, you were working with somebody who really was interested in what you were doing and would come along and look at it and spend time and talk to you, take you to the museum, take you out to coffee. It was great. And that kind of experience really gave me the taste for what I wanted to do. But then, like, you come back and you're going to school again and everything's all cut up. And the vision of where you want to be and what you're doing right now just didn't make any sense at all. So I taught that 1 year, and I went to Boston. And I rented this studio. And it cost $100 a month, which was a great deal of money for a tight-fisted Midwesterner. And I figured if I'm spending this amount of money, I got to use it. And so I would go down at a certain time every morning, I'd unlock the door, and I'd walk in. And I also, every time I sat down, I would hear the money dropping in the background, you know. I couldn't afford to sleep. It was too expensive. I had it figured out what it cost me by the day, you know, by the hour. And damn it all, I used the thing. And what was interesting is, like, there was two responses. That initial response that was sort of get you going on a painting, but would burn out very fast. And then there was a second one, just in the activity of doing it. And it really took me a long time to learn that. When I was in graduate school, too, Francois Mauriac came one time and gave a talk, and I went over to the Union and I listened to it. And he was going on and on about some great point in literature. And somebody asked him a question at the end, and they said, why did you decide to be a painter? Or a writer? It's obviously hitting close to home. So why did you decide to be a writer? And he said, well, when I was young, I liked doing short stories and poetry and this kind of thing. And as I got older, I started imitating the styles of, you know, people whose work I respected. And he said, then finally I started writing from 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock every day. And I sort of sat there listening. I thought, gee, that sounds terrific. And it's like all of a sudden in your mind you're convinced that maybe that's what should be done. And I started reading autobiographies of people, and I suddenly discovered they had a specific time that was sort of their sacred time, that they worked and they did every day. And I thought, that's fine, and I couldn't do it. And finally spending that much money on a studio, it was like I was forced to do it. But in the activity of doing it, suddenly something really changed. And I noticed several things. There's one, that sense of a room of your own. I first tried painting in my apartment. And I wasn't married. I didn't have children. There was nothing else to worry about. But I couldn't work, you know. I got confused. Was I supposed to be sleeping, which I was very good at? Was I supposed to be eating? Was I supposed to be reading? What was I supposed to be doing, you know? I mean, some people naturally can just sort of enter into something and get going on it. And I'm one of these people that, you know, spend most of my time stewing. So anyway, that's just sort of. The other thing is other people have very different styles of working. I mean, some people can enter into something. They take on one project at a time. They go at it with a great deal of energy, and they finish it. And I sort of, you know, I start 30 at a time, and I never finish them, right? Reduced circumstances, smaller studio. That was a terrific space. I mean, that was an incredibly big room. It was at a university. And it was like a year as an artist in resident. The only thing I did is I made the canvas stretchers so big I couldn't get them out of there. Those I could get out, but I had some that were so big I couldn't get them out, and I had to cut them up, so I've got a bunch of diptychs and triptychs now. One day I went out and I measured the back of our station wagon, and I made a bunch of canvas stretchers that exactly fit in the back of the station wagon. And I was so excited, you know. I was really thrilled with myself. It was such a practical thing to do. I was delighted. I come in all ecstatic, and my face is red, and Michael says, what in the world? You know, you're all excited because you measured the back of the station wagon. Now is to talk about Zen. Every time I move to a new studio, there's a new Novak. This is a little Novak. But we bought this house. I got interested in Zen about 6 years ago because I was finding the Christian mystics really talked about an interior journey in other than the kind of psychological language that contemporary psychologists were into, and described much better. I think the analogy between what is going on in the mystic self-understanding and what's going on in the activity of the artist is really very close in that sense of the awakening, the preparation, the illumination, the discipline, the dark night, and the final kind of
unitive experience. I got interested in Zen because Zen spoke much more concretely, and this is Soto Zen as opposed to, I mean, you can do the sitting and you can do the koans. I think the sitting is incredibly useful. I want to talk about that a little bit more. I think that what we're trying to do is to get a point that each activity can have a sense of presence to it and unity to it. And one of the themes in both Christian and Zen mysticism is detachment. Using the word detachment. What they mean by detachment is not sort of a floating up on the ceiling somewhere and viewing things. You know, we talk about detachment and we say we're objective, you know, we're apart and we're viewing it from over there. They mean exactly the opposite. Detachment is from the individual ego. So in fact that you become present to the activity in an uncluttered way. You're not bringing your own, the minute you bring your own individual ego to the thing, you've got your own sort of thing going, you know? You're not really present to the activity in the deepest sense that you can be present to it. And that's an incredibly difficult thing to do, and especially in the Western sense, is that the weight on the individual ego. But the other side of it is until you have a sense of the self, you can't lose the self. But the final transcending of that kind of individual ego is the point that they keep talking about, a dying to the self. There's a kind of psychological death that has to happen, go through, that theme of psychological death, to die and to be reborn again. Anyway, we got into Zen, right? Because, first of all, there was this house, and then there were dirty dishes, and there was a husband, and then there was children, and each child, you know, I had everything in boxes, very neatly arranged for me, you know. I had my pink box and my green box, my yellow box. And each box depended on, you had to get the studio at a certain time, you know. And I used to take, when they were very tiny, I was nursing them, and I would take them with me. And then I had a babysitter, and then I had this, and then if the babysitter didn't show up, and I had these 3 hours, you know, my precious hours. And if somebody didn't show up, I was in a state of hysteria, you know, because I couldn't get there. And then there was a kind of rigidity setting in because it all depended on sort of working out little schedules and moving your boxes around and getting in one box and out the other box and getting the door closed and getting someplace else. And I thought, this can't go on. And as I say, each child has its own little box. You can't sort of put 3 children in one box and say, label children, and then we know what to do with them because each one is so incredibly different. They're fascinating, they're fantastic, but they really are different. Anyway, so there we are. And I thought, Zen, what does Zen talk about? Not only, it's interesting, when they use the word awakening, it's like the awakening for them is at the end. You know, that's the final thing. The awakening is a sense of the integrated life and the unity. Whereas the Christian mystics, you know, the awakening, that word is used as the beginning of the journey. There's the phrase, when hungry, eat, when tired, sleep. How do you be present to ordinary activities? And how do you move with a sense, if you're present to one and not carrying on the baggage of the last moment to the next moment? It's the only way you can survive. I'm ambivalent about sort of, how do I want to say this? The methods of meditation can also be another form of self-deception, because what it do is it segments out your 20 minutes in the morning and your 20 minutes at night, but you go along the rest of the day and live in your same way, but you reduce the tension, right? By doing that meditation at 2 times a day, you manage to reduce the tension. But in fact, is this changing? Is this actually changing the rest of the way you make decisions, the rest of the way you run your life? That's why I think there can be a certain danger of sort of looking to one form to affect the whole range of what you're trying to do. There's the inner sanctum, and back here used to be our bedroom. And every time Michael went out of town, I started taking over more of the house. And of course, painting at home is so difficult that I thought, well, if I have an inner sanctum, if I have an atrium to my inner sanctum, then I'm going to sort of sit here and meditate and zip in here and be very creative. And of course, that didn't work. All I did is make the room so messy, it's really hard to even get through it now. So then I thought, well, if I really going to integrate this, I started taking over more and more rooms. The next time he went out of town, I took over the dining room. And I was stretching canvases in the dining room. Then I took over the living room. I was doing something else in there. It's like I was going to make the whole house a loft. And all it did is make the whole house a mess. My nerves were shot. The kids were into everything, and it was a real disaster. And also I decided, you know, after 6 years of trying something out, maybe you ought to call it a failure, right? You know, you get in there and you turn on the heaters, and it's so hard to work that you rush down and put a load of wash in, and all this kind of stuff was going on. I thought, oh, God. And I suddenly discovered it's really been exciting, you know. It's like 5 damn years. I'm one of these people that used to want to be instant Picasso in 1 year, you know. 5 years I spent diddling around with this thing. Something's beginning to work, and it's really interesting. The powers of concentration have really changed. What it used to take me 5 and 6 hours to do, I can do in 2 or 3 hours. The sense of moving into a thing and being present to it faster has really changed too. I also decided a couple years ago that I used to talk about art as just an androgynous kind of thing, you know, neither masculine or feminine. Terrific, you know. It's a no-no to have children anyway, and especially if you live in a house and you cook and all that, that's a real thing. You shouldn't admit it. You know, we finally admit that we're a woman, but we don't admit we do anything else, right? Except paint all day long. Really terrific. So I thought, no, that's not really right. All these other things are making a difference on what I do. So I trotted in my kitchen one day and I decided I will talk about my disorganized kitchen. And I took a picture and I got it back and I thought, what has happened? Because I started out as a professional photographer. I had a little scholarship. And, you know, I was going to be a photographer for National Geographic. That was my first great ambition. What has happened? I have this out of focus slide. And then it suddenly dawned on me, whenever I'm in a kitchen, I'm totally out of focus. I cannot. There are some people that can go into my kitchen. My husband, for one, can go in there and put things away and have it looking terrific in 20 minutes. I go in there and spend 3 goddamn hours, and it looks worse than before I started. I decide to clean. What do? I take everything out of every drawer in every room of the house and set it out. You know, I mean, there's no system to it all. And Michael says, I don't understand. He says, you're not stupid, but you're so messy, you know. He says, you're so disorganized. And then I'm sitting there complaining about this, and the final thing, of course, he says to me is, well, St. Teresa of Avila wouldn't complain so much about her kitchen, you know, about doing this. She would just do it, right? She'd just go ahead and do it. Good habits. And I finally thought, you know, that's not right. I said, first of all, Teresa of Avila lived in community, right? She didn't have to take care of the kitchen every day, 7 days a week, plus 3 children. Plus, you know, we share the activity. So the final thing on this, I thought, fine, if I can't, I got all interested in communes, you know. It wasn't, you know, couldn't find anybody to live with us, and I don't think Michael would stand for it anyway. He'd go up the wall. So anyway, I thought, well, you know, if I can't have my commune, I will make a list. So the first list I made was like little boxes for what the kids were going to do. You know, they're 7 and 9 now. They should take over the housework. I thought, great. And then it dawned on me, I made another list. Aha. And on that list is Michael. There is Karen, and there's Richard and Tanya. And theoretically, I just got the list mimeographed. Theoretically, Michael's going to have to cook for 1 week, do the laundry for 1 week. Now, what's probably going to happen is that he takes us to Burger King every night for 1 week. But anyway, you know, it's a try. What can you do? You go out and collect pebbles is what you do. I spend a great deal of time taking walks, collecting very nice pebbles. I'm going to go through, I've talked too long. I'm going to zip through these. This is acrylic again. Anyway, I figured if the monastic tradition can find some transcendence in being present to small things, right? The other thing is, when the women's movement talks about housework as shit work, I think it's a dreadful mistake, because if it's shit work, then nobody should do it, right? What we're really trying to say is, look, see the fantastic value in scrubbing that pot till it's really clean. And then everybody's just going to be beating down my kitchen door to scrub my pot and get this great sense of spiritual transcendence. Nobody's been beating down my door yet, though. This is details of that same painting now. Again, that blind eye. Pardon?
What year was this?
What, 3 years ago, I guess. I've got a couple at the end that, my problem is that I keep taking the pictures, but I'm not very, you know, like today, I was going to bring a whole bunch of other pictures. I couldn't find them. I've got slides in boxes, sitting in strange places all over the place. And the other thing is most of the recent ones, I haven't taken the details of the slides. I think it's really important to have the detail going down into the, this is Tanya and Richard and Yana. 3 reasons for Zen, right? It's really terrific to watch them work on things. And Kessler has this big thing about, I wish I could remember now, but sort of implying that primitives and children, what they're doing is different, that tension between strange connections. I think we almost artificially create it in a way that children have it naturally. You talk about returning to the innocence of children. Children aren't innocent. I mean, every activity they enter into is terrifying in a way that we sort of take for granted, If we leave, it's a form of death for them, abandonment, There's all kinds of ritual things that kids go through that are really incredibly powerful. But also the way they notice things. And it was fun the other day, the little 2-year-old picked up this cookie, or this cupcake, and she says, "I'm scared." I thought, my goodness, why does a cupcake scare one, And I went over and I looked at it, and there were 3 little raisins or something on it, and they were sunken a little bit, and the damn thing looked like a skull. And she said to me, "It's a monster." I thought, she's absolutely right. But it takes a 2-year-old to see a monster in a cupcake, right? And then she draws these little things, and she talks about them. And the sad thing, I think, is like the 7-year-old, she did fantastic things before she went to school. Really complicated, fantastic. The road to our house, beautiful, beautiful, intricate little design with the strange house at the end, just huge, fantastic thing. And the little boy, too. And they get to school, and all of a sudden, oh, it's incredible. It's like, this is supposed to be modern art, and the teacher comes in with this stamp, and today we do bugs. Everybody stamps the paper, and they make these bugs. And you have something, that looks modern. There are 20 of these bugs, all looking the same, going down the wall. And then she writes this little thing in the newsletter that they send out. And art is very important because it teaches us what to do with our leisure time. Right? Haha. Did I drop all my notes? Oh, my hairbrush. I should never ask. Let me go back to the hairbrush. Whoops, where'd the hairbrush go? You're not going to see the hairbrush. It refuses to return. No, I'll go back. No, take one more look at that hairbrush. Let's go back 1 second. Where'd it go? There it is. Beautiful. Fantastic. I was zipping through, turning the other way one time, and this thing came on, and somebody says, "Oh, that was a beautiful Zen statement that you snuck in on us, like the beauty in ordinary objects." I thought, well, what it really meant, what I really wanted to talk about was authority and discipline, And they were sort of appalled, what do you mean? And I said, well, I tried to get one of the kids to hold it, and they wouldn't do it, and pose with it. And I said, I really, it's like you go through that with children especially. And I think this is why I've gotten interested in the kind of, I've gone back to that sense of the importance of ritual and a kind of what are the different forms of discipline and habit, and which of those habits releases the creative activity. And I think it really is released through a kind of ritual, kind of repetition of time, of space. I mean, there's a whole series of psychological things that are involved in this, which are accessible to all of us and which children, in a sense, have very naturally in the beginning, and which they are trained out of. The irony of is, you have something almost naturally, and it's trained right out of you. There's a receptiveness to the unconscious that they have. There's a way that they can put strange connections together. There's a way, if you allow it, there's a way that they can talk about things. The other side of it is you're doing this thing on one side, and the other side, I really believe in a kind of formal, not authority. I mean, there's all forms of authority. What I'm trying to get at is there's a kind of authority that the Zen mystic talks about, authority of guidance. And boy, the importance of authority. I mean, we live in New York now, and I guess what's happened is that I started out with these Summerhillian ideas. Children naturally left to their own devices, and eating when they want to will be so creative and open and responsive, et cetera, et cetera. Well, first of all, you go crazy when 3 people are eating at 3 different times a day. I mean, that's just a minor thing. The other thing is that I discovered the peer group. I had this image of one great kibbutzim all over the country. The Nuclear family was a disaster, and we would just sort of have one big, kibbutzim. Then I discovered the peer group, and I thought, oh my God, the peer group was a real disaster. I mean, suddenly I'm surrounded by these smart-ass kids who are really mean, you know? They're out there kicking my little kids in the stomach, you know, my sweet little tender little angels. And I've got two things going. I want to say, you know, around New York, you've got to fend for yourself, right? But you don't want them to turn into that either. So what are you doing? You're sitting out in the curbstone all day long saying, when shall I intervene and when shall I not? Stop that swearing, you know, all this kind of stuff. Oh, the other thing is, I don't know why this reminds me. I really got to tell you my tennis shoe story. And then I'll shut up because I've gone an hour, and I meant to stop at 45 minutes. I'm really organized. Another thing I learned in New York is, I mean, the whole thing I'm trying to talk about is how do you hit the mark? All these things are how do you hit the mark in any activity you do? How do you become really present to something and really act on it with a lot of other stuff going on? And I was had a show out in Berkeley, and I had some talks, and afterwards I was invited to a cocktail party, and I met somebody there who had met Michael or had lived near us somewhere on Long Island and called Michael up for lunch, and Michael hadn't shown. You know, this is 4 years later, and he starts fussing about Michael not showing up. What a real put down, he says, you know, and this kind of stuff. And I thought, gee, you know, if Michael doesn't want to go to lunch with somebody, he doesn't go, right? Then I thought about it, and I said, you know, why didn't you call him up and say, look, where in the world were you? You know, if he doesn't go, he's forgotten. But you, for 4 years, he's been using up a lot of energy, stewing about this thing. Every time he sees Michael's name mentioned, you know, he gets angry. You know, he feels stood up. And it's an incredible amount of wasted energy just because he didn't call up and say, where the hell were you? This kind of thing. All right, the other side of that is, I mean, I'm really trying to learn how to hit the mark, and a lot of women don't know how to do this. They don't know how to they don't know how to, without a lodge of excess rage that misses the point, you know. How do you fire your doctor over a reasonable thing, right? How do you do this? How do you really hit the target? And I had to laugh because one day my kids came home from visiting a friend down the street, and the father had said to the little 4-year-old, if you don't get your tennis shoes on any faster, I'm going to stick them up your ass so far you'll never get them out. And I thought, that's fantastic. That's really terrific. I mean, it's awful for a 4-year-old, but what an image, you know? That's New York. You know, somehow that just epitomized the whole thing to me. So I suddenly started running around. Every time somebody would take advantage of me, which they will because I'm sort of quiet about things, I was telling them to put pencils, books, shoes, rulers, you know, whatever was involved, the directory, the this and that, you know, up appropriate place. You know, it was fantastic. I had such a good time. I don't know what that has to do with a hairbrush. I can put the hairbrush there too. But that sense of that no matter what, there's an authority that's involved, and there's all forms of neglect with kids right now. And there's an incredible amount of neglect with what you call good families, you know. I mean, there's the poverty, there's a neglect of poverty, but there's also a neglect of people who just don't want to bother. The next door lady puts the kids outside and closes the door and watches television all day long because she doesn't know, she can't manage the whole thing. And a lot of this happens because we've really destroyed our sense of community and what we do. Anyway, I'm going to stop. I've got to show these last. Zip, zip, zip. Now, this is recent. And this one is this last year. These colors are, again, there's a funny mixture now. The real bright colors are gone. And the interior of the figure is getting very dark. Well, that's a bright background. This is the one I'm working on right now. See, darker, darker, darker. Nothing like the East Coast to bring in the black again. And I end up with a girl under the garage door. Being that's where we are most of the time, I guess. And that's it. If there's any questions, or, yeah, sure, I'd love to. You know, anybody who has to leave, leave. Anybody who has questions, ask them. Remind me. I'm always forgetting to talk about something. I'm racking my brain trying to think what it was I left out this time. I have all these little lists of things I remember to talk about, and I talk about discipline.
Getting mad at people when you're mad instead of waiting, being present to watch. painting, when you're painting. That's what I heard, I don't know. That's,
Yeah, but I guess that's right. But it's so hard to do. I mean, that kind of presence is, you have to think, right? I just think about role models. When we talk about women, there's these kind of great search for role models right now. And we have this kind of Virginia Woolf in her room girl, you know, the importance of having this be such a place to be. And then I started thinking about who are the women that we're just looking to? And I discovered, well, we've got Virginia Woolf, whose husband took care of her. And we've got Joyce Carol, whose husband takes care of her. And we have Flannery O'Connor, who's really very young, whose mother took care of her. And we've got, Erica Young, whose husband played land monster. You know, it's really incredible. I mean, people I can think of that have children, I can think of perspective as a critic. And I think criticism is much more manageable than being a writer, a novelist, or a poet. Diana Trelling, the Grand Dame, you know, terrific, but again, criticism. Think of somebody for me.
Look at Sexton. Whatever, look at Anne Sexton.
Anne Sexton. That represents the Soviet planet. I mean, her early creative thing really depended on the destructive at the same time. And you laid on the destructive, which was really, there's a terrific review in Ramparts, I think it was in January, by Denise Leverton, talking about, she says, when Soviet plants committed suicide, there was a whole rash of young poets who committed suicide. Because like the poetic thing was to commit suicide. She said, I only hope that don't do this. You know, it's like a plea, don't do this because the poet doesn't have to be a suicide. And I think, look to T.S. Eliot.
Naismith.
Pardon?
Naismith.
Is that true? Oh, sorry. I got confused. You know, that kind of equation, I think mostly in recent years, you know, because maybe of the 50s too, Jackson Pollock, I met Gregor Kepish a few years ago, and he was talking about, you know, all these friends not actually going out and shooting themselves. In fact, a lot of them did, but drinking too much and driving too fast, in a sense. Jackson Pollock drinking and driving and then crashing. How to will for destruction.
Shirley Jackson.
And that maybe we ought to look, that the creativity doesn't necessarily have to revolve on that side of it. That's, oh, I see. Mhm.
She got cancer. Oh, she's drank herself. No.
Yeah. But, you know, I think that's present all the time. But it's just that has to be something that really is talked about.
You're always calling attention to the way your colors were changing as you were moving one part of the country to the other. Did you notice your lines undergoing similar sorts of transformations at the same time?
Oh, the lines and things.
Yeah.
I thought about that.
Well, you know, thinking in terms of the last things that you did.
The last,
Yeah, the later things went back to clearer, cleaner lines of some of the things that I saw before. Couldn't get
Well, it's moving
associated
back.
with the movements.
Well, it's moving back to the other thing again, where it's getting much vaguer. I mean, what happened in California was really bright and linear, clear. And now everything's getting sort of dark, obscure.
The dark color were those figures you had,
Yeah.
and the last couple you showed there, I thought the lines were pretty clear.
The second one was pretty convoluted.
Yeah, I guess that's what I think. That last one is the
No,
red painting. Yeah,
Pardon?
that red painting you're thinking of?
No, I'm thinking of the two you showed right before that.
Oh, I see,
The
okay,
figures.
yeah, all right, that white,
Like
that
that,
white,
yeah.
yeah. I see.
The colors were darker, but the lines were very clear.
But that's changed.
You talked about hiring a model a little bit, but are these late things all done from memory?
Yeah, I haven't had a model for 6 years. I had a great thing going at Stanford because I had a girl who would come in and model when the babies were asleep. When when they were asleep, she'd model, and then she'd take them out for a ride when they were awake. That's a terrific arrangement. And then I paid her $1 an hour, and I would give her artwork, you know, prints and this kind of thing. great to be around a university. I mean, the financial thing is what people don't talk about. When you talk about careers and you talk about women who are lawyers and doctors, and I got in this big thing, where I started reading autobiographies of everybody. I even read one, Dr. Helen Trevall, whatever his name is, Dr. Kennedy's document. Great. I'm going to get all this insight into how these people managed, because she had 2 children. And I'm reading along, and of course then I discovered she had a full-time housekeeper. And I said, like I was reading in the New York Times last week, this husband and wife that are married and have a new baby are paying $135 a week for babysitting for a 5-month-old baby. Now, we've got a real problem here because, if you're in a profession like law or like whatever, you've got a good income coming in. If you're trying to be a writer or an artist or almost anything else, no income coming in. And when you finally start getting a reputation, you still don't get any income coming in. Oh, God. Yeah. And the trouble is, the other side is, I think even if I had the income that they have, I'd still want to be around those kids. The other side of it is that you can't be around 24 hours a day, and for their sake, you shouldn't be around 24 hours a day either. I mean, they need as much change and understanding of other people as you do. But I also found another side of that is that I finally, you ought to admit baby sometime. I went down and rented myself this little place downtown for $50 a month the other day. It's a strange little narrow room, and I've taken down exactly 5 canvases. I'm really kidding. I can't take all this chaos anymore. I've taken out 5 canvases and I've turned 4 of them to a wall. And I go in there and I assign myself 1 canvas to work on. None of this fitting down. I get carried away. I would have all these 20 canvases there, and I get a terrific color, and I zip them around. I put the same color on all the canvases, And I said, oh my goodness. The wall around moves over there. It's just like the way I take care of my house, And there's some people who approach things one way, and I also do this way. So I decided I've got to get this under control. It's disastrous. Other people say, why do you want to control it? I have a very good reason for controlling it. You just don't get things finished from your standpoint. I mean, maybe the same thing can happen. Anyway, I'm really having a good time now. I just one piece, Perfect. And Yana comes down. The woman next door is an Italian woman. She's running a beauty shop. And she's in there with her 2 kids. And her clients know the people. And it's just her kids come in my studio, and my little 2-year-old is in her place. There isn't prejudice about having your kids around, and it really is a thing about, and I'm not sure where it came from. I just even related to the Rockefeller Foundation years ago. You can imagine that. And we went up to this party, and I'd always taken everybody wherever we go. Just take a baby, and they've already been quiet, and it's not fussing. And I suddenly discovered there is a world that children are seeing and not heard. The old fancy world here, or the cut glass, and the fancy stuff, And so I went up the elevator to the Rockefeller party, and these 2 ladies looked at me and I said, my Jill, this is obviously your first Rockefeller party. I guess you want to see one go. And I got in there, and all these ladies sort of looked at me like this. And the men sort of couldn't quite decide what to do. And everything went all right, and I sat there, and the baby fell asleep, and the lady ate dinner. And finally, there was no great disaster. Everybody was so good. And then you forgot about it. The great coolie, about the President Sorrell, something about Michael Clay, being with us tonight. And I thought, I was so nervous about all of it. And then I suddenly realized it was a whole style of life. I mean, Michael's not here anymore, which I'm delighted, because it was a whole style of life for women. He enjoyed what he was doing, but there was also, what was my role? My role, or the role of women before, for the generation, most of the women, most of the people that are around the world, it's a super hostess, super this, super that. I mean, there's no way you could do all those things. So I was there about, clothes. And, got friends who really dress up their kids and they were terrific all the time. That takes a lot of time. It really takes a lot of time. I buy my clothes out of Penny's catalog, but I can't stand the show. It takes too much time. This kind of stuff. And you can decide where you're going to put your values. And I decided I have 2 values for the kids. One that they brush their teeth. There's no point having it fall off. I'm thinking of the other. That they learn to be kind to people, And I really work on those 2 things. And I do insist that they brush their teeth and wash their face. That's my skin. But other than that, it's not really important for somebody else. No, I really got preoccupied with this kind of stuff. And I'm not saying, you know, when I'm 150, I'll tell you what I really do. It's really,
Do you teach Phil?
I did this last month, and it was really terrific, and it was an ideal kind of thing. I have another thing too, is for artists to teach full time, it's really important. I don't know, I mean, there should be some way. If you teach in a university, I mean, you get totally, where do you get time to work? I mean, that's the thing I found out when I was trying to teach at college. Because by the time you get through teaching your classes, you get through with going to your community meetings, you get through with all this other stuff, and then you have your home, and